superhero is Rob Favini. Rob is the head of Library Advisory and Development at the Massachusetts Board of Library Commissioners. There he serves as the LSTA coordinator and leads the agency's team of grant consultants. In addition, he oversees outreach services to library directors, trustees, and friends groups. Rob also serves in his spare time as a trustee at the Fitchburg Public Library in Fitchburg, Massachusetts. Our second speaker and superhero is Denise Lyons. Denise has been Deputy Director of Statewide Development at the South Carolina State Library since 2008. She has an MS in Public Service Management and Nonprofit Administration from DePaul University in Chicago, and an MLIS from the University of South Carolina. Denise was a TLA Leadership Fellow in 2010 and is currently part of ISLA's Evidence for Global and Disaster Health Special Interest Group. And while I'm speaking about the South Carolina Library, I'd like to do a little shout out and congratulations to J. Carolyn Smith, who's the Diversity and Inclusion Consultant at the South Carolina State Library. She was named as one of the 2020 LJ Movers and Shakers. So lots of superheroes going on in South Carolina. Our final superhero speaker for this afternoon is Mark Smith. Mark is Director and Librarian at the Texas State Library and Archives Commission and has served his home state since November 2013. He holds a Bachelor of Arts in English and a Master's in Library Science from the University of Texas at Austin. Mark has over 35 years experience in the library field and has worked in 3 states and in a variety of library settings. I will mention here that we will let each one of the speakers speak and then we will take questions. So now, Rob, if you want to start us off.
Great. Thanks, Michelle. Also, I'm excited to be on the last program of the day and not have to worry about people running out to catch flights at the airport. So this is a very exciting time to present. What I want to do today is walk through our disaster preparedness planning at the Mass Board of Library Commissioners, and it's been a bit of a journey. I want to talk a little bit of how we were set up before the pandemic and how we are really realizing that what we were set up for really needed to change. And so we're shifting gears very quickly, we're evolving, and we're trying to be as flexible as possible. One of the things that we came to realize, the old military adage is that generals arm up to fight the previous war. And in our case, the previous war was Hurricane Katrina. This was the defining event that really informed our disaster preparedness services that we developed, many of which under the eyes of Gregor Trinkaus-Randall, a longtime member of the MBLC staff. It really was a program that defined it in that we were very much concerned with buildings, we were very much concerned with collections, and very much concerned with all things physical. In particular, we were really concentrating on the impact of water events and the aftermath of these water events. So we were talking a lot about mold and drying things out and repairing things to get them before an event like a water event would happen. So a lot of our assistance plan that have been in action really reflected this. And again, it had to do with physically teaching librarians how to process things, talking directly to librarians, archivists, records custodians. We were concentrating on things like cleanup kits, emergency supplies located all across the state, and encouraging folks to have some on hand. We also had a way to help with technical assistance if it was an emergency on call. If something happened, if a flood happened, if a hurricane happened, if pipes burst over collection. We were really set up to do that. And we had a lot of partnerships with that in some contracts with organizations such as Polygon, Belfour, BMS CAT, and the New England Document Conservation Center. In addition to that, we try to have folks set up for success in their own worlds and be as prepared as they can. MBLC was initial partner in the creation of D-Plan, which is a disaster planning software. This enables libraries of all sizes to put in their particular collection and requirements and their physical environments, and then with the software create a plan. So it gave a lot of capability to everyone throughout the state, no matter the size. On a side note, there is a new version of D-Plan coming out, which is being developed by Northeast Document Conservation Center and Lyricist, so keep an eye out for that. But this proved to be a very useful tool for our libraries, and we're happy to be part of it. The other thing that we found is that Katrina was a real rallying, had a rallying effect to start partnerships that maybe wouldn't have started before. A good example of this is our COSTEP Massachusetts. We are key partners to this day, and really the mission of this organization is to bring together libraries, cultural institutions, and pair them up with state and regional organizations and agencies to provide disaster relief. I would recommend anyone going to it. We do have national and regional resources listed. Right now, the focus of this group has been on programming and networking as opposed to specific events, but they're also another ever-evolving organization. And finally, even through our sub-grants, you can see that our concentration really was on protecting collections and really preserving and digitizing things with an idea, again, that physicalness of it. All that, of course, changed a couple months ago with the COVID-19 pandemic. Massachusetts was hit rather hard. Right now, today's case log, we have slightly over 79,000 cases reported with slightly over 5,000 deaths due to the COVID-19. Like everyone else, it really presented us a challenge of moving to a remote location, working remotely, and really not having a playbook. And we were immediately dealing with libraries who had a lot of questions to answers we just simply did not have because this is something that was so new and so different that we couldn't pull anything off the shelf, nor could our existing disaster planning satisfy a lot of the questions they had. Just to walk you through the timeline of how we've been working through this, March 10th was the day the world changed for certainly for the MBLC. State of emergency was proclaimed. Our office shut down. We moved to remote locations, and that proved to be a challenge in itself, remobilizing as a remote organization. March 23rd was another big date. Here, the governor declared a stay-at-home advisory in keeping only essential businesses open. They did not mention libraries specifically, so that created a lot of debate whether libraries were essential. We never want to say libraries are not an essential part of the town, but for these purposes, it really didn't fit the plan, but we still had a few libraries that were opened up. On March 31st, they extended the declaration of essential businesses only. By that point, most of the libraries in Massachusetts had been closed. We started seeing furloughing and layoffs of staffs, and we just saw an overall anxiety level raise because on March 31st, the governor had put a pin in to say on May 4th we would be looking at a reopening date. That did not hold true because on April 28th, the governor had another statement where he was extending the closing ban till May 18th and announcing a reopening advisory board, and that's the position we're in now. Again, causing more anxiety because a lot of people are wondering where do libraries fit into this, and we did not have specific representation on this reopening board, but we have been connected with a lot of people who are involved in it. So how we have been working with this particular disaster, we partnered with our affiliate Massachusetts Library System and decided to have one place to put all of our resources. We were really concerning ourselves with getting any kind of announcements that came out or any kind of examples of how people are doing things and putting them in one location that people across the state have access to. In addition, using the connections that we had made through COSTEP, we are able to also distribute the Massachusetts Emergency Planning Daily Situation Report to all of our libraries. So we're trying to keep them informed as best we can as we find information. But as we got closer to the May 4th date, we really got the pressure from across the state of trying to open. What will be the next plan? So a lot of libraries were looking to any help with a advisory or some sort of a guidance in the planning of opening back, coming back to full services, restoration of full services. We don't like to say reopening because in a lot of ways libraries have never closed. They've just not had their buildings able to serve their clientele. So to better inform us, we partnered again with our affiliate Massachusetts Library System and the 10 automated library networks across the state. We hosted 10
I think Rob will join us in a second. Do we love technology? Yes, we do. It was interesting to see his slide on how it unfolded in such a short period of time. I'm really amazed at how the state library was able to move forward very quickly. Rob is in the process of calling back. And I'm sure at the end of these 3 presentations, you'll have plenty of questions, because there's a lot that's been covered and will continue to be covered by the other 2 speakers.
Hello, everyone. I was disconnected. I'm going to try to, I'm hoping I'm back on. I'm going to continue. We had 10 sessions with about 575 attendees, and we wanted to get some guidance around 3 specific areas of what people might have questions about. One of which was collections. We used a software package called Padlet. That was really just creating a major, almost like recreating a room where you could put sticky notes on large flip charts and capture people's input. On collections, we found out that a major concern was materials handling, and decontamination was top of the list. People wanted to know how safely they could handle their collections. Another part was they were looking for guidance around PPE. How can they get it? Who was supposed to be in charge to get it, and things like that. Another section that we looked at was the service delivery. This took into account how you were going to provide services once you got back into your building. We had a lot of questions around here were building occupancy, rules about excluding populations. Is it okay to not have elderly people come in with the general population? Is there a way to monitor children? Is it okay to close the children's room because children can't really social distance and wear face masks on a consistent basis? A lot of these things we're hoping that libraries are able to connect with their local boards of health to get some guidance around these parts too. And finally, we had a section around staff concerns. What folks are going to do once they get their staff into their libraries, what vulnerable populations among their staff, how do they deal with that? And again, this is one where we're driving people to go to their local health departments to find out what their rules are around staffing buildings and how they can let people in there. And again, throughout this whole thing, one of the things we learned is that people are really looking hard for library-specific guidance, and that's been the hardest part, is that now we're finding more examples out there, but for the longest time there really wasn't anything available that said specifically libraries should do X, Y, or Z. So right now we're working very hard on the resumption to full service guidance. We're talking about using a phased approach where the first phase is limited opening with just staff and then moving closer to opening full services. And also waiting with bated breath for the Governor's Reopening Advisory Commission, which is promising to give us a lot of more guidance specific of what we can do. And then preparing for being flexible to prepare for some possible fall shutdowns, and also working on our own agency contingency of service plans.
Thank you, Rob. And now we will take Denise Lyons.
Hello, everyone. I'm here to share some information about a research project that the State Library has been working on with faculty from the University of South Carolina, and then I'll move into some information about our statewide Emergency Preparedness Committee and work during this pandemic. We began the specific research project on librarians' roles in emergencies and natural disasters after the catastrophic flooding in South Carolina in 2015. Weather events here have not only increased over the years, but they have increased in intensity. We hosted 2 studies between 2015 and 2017, and then went to Houston to interview Houston Public Library staff and administrators about their role during Hurricane Harvey. Since librarians have long been first responders during all kinds of situations in the community, we felt it was important to learn about what professional librarians' knowledge, skills, and competencies were used during several years of weather events. Our goal is to use the findings to enhance curriculum development at the School of Library and Information Science at the University of South Carolina and continuing education offered by the State Library. To show you the severity of the flooding, these photos show Columbia in 2015, Charleston in 2016, and it's photo showing the same site in Houston before and after Hurricane Harvey. Our intention is to examine and document the dynamic phenomena related to public libraries and their social responsibilities in times of disaster. We developed our project from a public health framework because with it we can find clear guidelines in people, processes, and partnerships. Also, our lead researcher works with those in public health, and we felt if we wanted those colleagues to understand and support our work, a common framework they used would help. Situation-specific case research was utilized to design all 3 of the studies. The methodology consists of qualitative and quantitative approaches, including focus groups and a survey. In the first set of focus groups, information was collected regarding the librarians' activities, such as what information they gathered and distributed, library partnerships, and information needs in the use of technology, including social media. The study in 2017 consisted of a survey on community members' use of disaster information sources and evaluation of the information's credibility during and after the 2015 flooding and 2016 Hurricane Matthew. For the third project, we conducted 5 focus groups for a total of 50 librarians and administrators of the Houston Public Library. Our questions focused on 3 areas. The first was public librarians' use of multiple channels and technology for information distribution and services. The second was the public library's collaboration with multi-level agencies to facilitate emergency response and recovery. And the third was community members' use of disaster information sources and evaluation of the information's credibility before, during, and after Hurricane Harvey. If you have worked in a public library, you will see that our results yielded challenges that are probably not surprising. We learned the general public's lack of skill in using technology to access information was a significant problem. We already know that low literacy and functional literacy are challenges here in South Carolina. Even the FEMA agent agreed that their paperwork and processes are complicated. Another challenge we encountered was that the public libraries were not fully prepared to provide sufficient essential disaster and health information for adult users online. They were not proactive in disseminating and promoting access to critical disaster information in English and other languages. One library administrator specifically mentioned wishing for a health sciences librarian to help with health information during this time. We also learned that 14% of the state's FEMA applications were filed at the Richland County Public Library System in 2015, and that the internet is absolutely necessary for all of these processes. The lack of access to internet across the state, especially in rural areas, is a problem that continues today. Social media served as main channels to provide real-time information services. We learned there was a lot of sharing of page posts on Facebook and retweets on Twitter. Some libraries run their own social media updates, such as the State Library and our nearby Richland and Lexington County libraries, but in Houston, social media is centralized and goes out through the city's communication division. When conducting our surveys and interviews with public health partners, we came across several instances of the library being an integral part of the community. The FEMA agent stressed was what a positive experience he had working in the library. In South Carolina, the libraries have strong relationships which were valuable during these disasters and remain important today. In Georgetown, for example, during emergencies, the staff from the library regularly serves in the county's Emergency Operations Center. This slide shows some of the required competencies and skills that we learned through the research. Public libraries are in a vital position to serve their local community information needs and to reach community members whose everyday lives have been affected by a crisis, because the community trusts libraries and librarian services in times of crisis. We do note, however, that many of these on the slide are not directly incorporated into the LIS curricula, but we believe that the professional degree should include coursework to cover them. We also believe that the LIS program should provide mentoring to enable public librarians to deliver training programs to support staff members' professional development. Our findings also indicate there are a few provisions of critical information services that public libraries and librarians should provide. It's very important to make sure that there are trustworthy digital health resources for adult users. In addition to that point, we believe in providing health information, and technology literacy training to the general public will be helpful. They should also promote the use of credible resources in multiple languages and services by the public library's websites anytime. Partnerships with medical librarians and public health staff and agencies can support these efforts. At the time, several public librarian participants in the study did not feel it was necessary for the library and information science education programs to cover disaster preparedness, response, and recovery in the LIS curricula, although future research will study whether this still holds true. Current plans for the school include at least one new course to address some of these competencies. It was agreed, however, that continuing education offerings such as those provided by the State Library are essential to better prepare librarians to provide disaster and health information services. The State Library regularly provides webinars, training classes, and multiple day trainings or mini conferences, as well as up-to-date resources on our website and in our catalog. From this and other learnings at the agency, we decided we would create a statewide emergency preparedness committee to help with ongoing needs for preparedness and planning, especially when it's not during our typical bad weather season. We have a few members of our state library staff and some of the public library staff who have been a part of various emergency preparedness trainings in recent years. Our first tasks are to build a network of resources and create a replicable toolkit, as well as update the LibGuide. We plan to include not just weather emergencies, but safety and, of course, now pandemics. Secondarily, we'll be hosting an emergency preparedness and facility summit modeled on the one from the Georgia Public Library Service, and their team of Nate Rawl and Angela Stanley have offered their support. We also want to replicate the FEMA Preparedness Ambassador Program from Region 2 in New Jersey, which you may have heard Michelle Stricker from the New Jersey State Library talk about at PLA. The committee will also continue to work on continuing education needs, such as those listed on the slide, and developing stronger relationships with partners and experts in the field. Usually, I'll show you some of the resources that we use, but with our lack of time today, I've just listed some of the websites that you can review and use in the future. This is a screenshot of the LibGuide that we put together with our COVID-19 resources. It includes our general information, reopening information, and while not on this screenshot, there's also a communications guide and printable posters in English and Spanish. What we have been doing at the State Library focuses a lot on continuing education, professional development, and general guidance for library staff and administrators. We hold weekly informal chats, launch some interactive trainings, and believe it or not, the jugglers actually have a piece that addresses mindfulness and have greatly expanded online learning offerings. With our CARES funds, we're distributing MiFi devices and supporting more permanent solutions for bookmobile wireless services, as well as some direct sub-grants. We continue to offer our guidance on reopening plans and communication plans as our agency is still fully working remotely. We've been working at the federal and state level with our representatives on broadband expansion and also other topics that will benefit the libraries. So we will continue to move forward with our projects and programs, surveying our libraries regularly to assure that we're keeping up with special needs and to see how all this progresses over the next few months. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. Thank you.
Thank you, Denise. I really appreciate all your thoughts on this. And our next speaker is Mark Smith.
Okay, thank you, Michelle, and good afternoon, everyone. I appreciate having the opportunity to participate in the panel today. I learned a great deal from the speakers. I'm going to kind of briefly touch on a lot of the points that they talked about, although I also wanted to start out talking a little bit about our agencies, how we responded as an agency to the situation. With dealing with the crisis, we have been essentially guided by two sets of documents. The first is our Continuity of Operations Plan, or COOP, which is a required document for all state agencies in Texas, and which we review and revise every year. The COOP defines major disasters that could disable large parts of our operation and lays out structures for emergency management and communication during those periods. The COOP in Texas, as you might imagine, has been very geared towards natural disaster, which until now has been mostly what we have had to deal with. But on a more basic level, we also have a loose set of documents for our agency that we call the Business Continuity Plan, and that's a policy and procedure that defines how to maintain essential services under kind of more normal circumstances. Now, I wish I could say that either of these documents plan for a pandemic, as I have heard that some other organizations' policies have done. They did not. So we've had to basically adapt from our COOP as we defined which of our operations were considered essential and needed to stay open and which were not. And our response to the pandemic, I will say, has sort of fallen between these two documents, and we've had to kind of anticipate where we needed to take the agency in response to the situation as it developed, and under somewhat conflicting guidance, I would say, from time to time from state and local agencies. I will say that fortunately for us, until recently, the governor had mainly left it up to state agencies to develop their own responses and gave us a lot of latitude to do that, which we have appreciated and has allowed us to respond as we've needed to. Now, shifting to our kind of our response, in terms of the libraries of the state, I was listening with great interest to Rob and Denise's comments about Katrina and Denise's comments about lessons learned in Harvey. We too were able to learn a lot of really valuable lessons during Hurricane Harvey and afterwards. Hurricane Harvey was, of course, an incredibly devastating weather event in Texas and in national history. And we learned about many resources that we had not been aware of before. Most notably, we learned, to our surprise, maybe nobody else's, but that libraries are specifically designated in FEMA as essential services, which means that they can go to the head of the list for recovering funding needed to reopen libraries if they've been badly damaged. The other thing that we learned about is the Heritage Emergency National Task Force, or HENTF, which is a unit of FEMA tasked to respond to the impact of a natural disaster on cultural heritage institutions, including libraries. And we were able, through HENTF and their very responsive administrator, Lori Foley, to connect with a network of people across Texas who were also responding to the emergency. They connected us with folks in museums, archives, art institutions, historic preservation, and humanities, who were also coping with the same types of impact. Also during Harvey, we greatly benefited from the prior experience of other states, most notably New Jersey, where they had just recently dealt with Hurricane Sandy. Our colleagues at the New Jersey State Library, we met with them immediately following the initial impact of Hurricane Harvey, and we're able to really learn a lot of great lessons from them and really chart our response. And finally, I want to say that we were very grateful to our colleagues at the IMLS who allowed us to use maximum flexibility to extend LSTA funds to be able to award libraries small grants to help them recover. Those were great lessons we learned after Harvey, and they did help us somewhat in this crisis. But as the other speakers have explored, there are similarities and specific differences between recovering from a hurricane emergency and the kind of pandemic situation we've had with the coronavirus. I have to say that being a different kind of emergency, and frankly one that our library community and we were really not fully prepared for. So like most of the rest of society, I think on some level we have been reactive in this situation more than proactive in terms of the pandemic aspects of it. But I will say that I think our reactions have been ahead of the curve of guidance that we've received, at least through official channels, and we sort of stayed a little bit ahead of that. But like with Harvey, we learned some very key lessons from coronavirus, have learned. So under FEMA, libraries are considered essential services. That's still true, but what does that mean to be an essential service if all library services are closed, which most of ours have been and still are? We maintain and have maintained publicly that the current crisis has shown that libraries are more essential than ever. And libraries that we have observed that were the most progressive in terms of virtual and remote services are the ones that have best been able to serve their clientele during the crisis. Libraries still have access to FEMA funding, but it's now rolled into funding for cities and counties and administered on the state level by an agency in Texas called the Texas Department of Emergency Management. Lori Foley's still with FEMA, and we have been in touch with her, but she has not been quite as direct a player this time around. Much of the preparation that libraries have done around disaster recovery, which involves paper and books, as well as furniture and equipment and structures and other tangible resources, has not been as applicable in this emergency. And I think as Denise suggested, and the other speakers, this has been the lessons that have been applicable are the ones that are about how to keep the staff and the public safe, how to connect to information resources, how to be a conduit to recovery information, and that's a somewhat different thing under the virus situation. This is a little different threat in that we're not dealing with wind and rain damage. It's an invisible, deadly threat that has required a response. And frankly, in some parts of our state, that has seemed sometimes like overkill to some people, especially in areas that haven't been as touched. And I have to be honest and say it's compounded at times by conflicting guidance from different levels of government, and now we have this kind of partisan divide issue that is complicating things as well. Specific to libraries, we've seen that many libraries lack sufficient remote access. Lack of broadband, of course, is always a problem, as well as lack of devices with which to access online services. And we've been concerned by a lack of consistent messaging for libraries about how they're responding, how to communicate their value, and how they can be and should be part of the solution for recovery. So in light of that unique challenge of the pandemic, we've tried to provide libraries with specific tools and responses. Like many states, we have tracked closures in our state and reported that information to national groups. We're also trying to track libraries that are reopening. We very early on put up a resource page for libraries with links to relevant documents. That URL is listed there. Our Library Development and Networking Group convened a series of conversations with libraries statewide, including a kickoff webinar that had nearly 1,000 people participating, and that was followed by a series of virtual regional meetings across the state to share information and to find out what libraries were coping with. We developed a communications plan for libraries to use during the crisis, and that has proved quite helpful. We created a resource guide for library reopening, as some of you have, and we've cribbed from other states liberally, I can assure you. We were also, I have to say, very grateful for the CARES grants. We are using those funds to provide sub-grants to libraries to address COVID response, as well as digital inclusion for our libraries. So just to kind of conclude our story and bring you up to date, on April 27th, Governor Abbott went on TV to announce that he would be opening up Texas and specifically identified libraries and museums among the services that were allowed to reopen. Of course, we welcome the governor's implicit judgment that libraries are among the most needed services in society. However, most libraries in Texas are city or county libraries and have not yet opened. But the governor did specify that state-run libraries would open for service. So since last week, we have been offering limited services in our reading room here at our building, but we're doing that very cautiously and on an appointment-only basis. So that's where we are with our work on the COVID response, both as an agency and in support of local libraries as they work through the issues. But I'll just close with the observation that in times of crisis, we know that people look to libraries for help in recovery, and libraries in turn look to their state libraries for support. This situation is so different from other disasters we've faced in terms of people. A lot of people are hurting. Some have lost loved ones. Some have been touched by illness, loss of jobs and incomes. People don't know where they're going to live, or even how they're going to live, how they're going to cope. People are deeply uncertain about the future. They're scared that the situation is going to get worse. We're certainly dealing with that on a staff level and on a societal level, and certainly through our libraries. But I really believe, and I know everybody on this call does as well, that libraries can be very helpful in the crisis. I think it's going to be more demanding emotionally and psychologically than most of what we've dealt with in the past. Our disaster response is going to have to rely on our ability to develop community sustainability. Some of the things Denise was talking about apply here, of course, helping people find jobs, helping them retool for transition to different types of work, supporting remote learning, information access, and just to help them connect to recreational reading and viewing that I think is important to nourish their souls. So it's a strange new world we're facing. Libraries are uniquely situated, I think, though, to help people to cope with that. And, of course, our state libraries will help them cope as well. So there's my contact information, and I'll join my colleagues and be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mark. We really appreciate all your experience and knowledge. It's been wonderful to hear Rob and Denise and Mark talk about how the various libraries have been handling this crisis. And it is a very different animal than what we've had in the past. I see one question from Colleen, just asking if she can, asking Mark if she can have a link to the FEMA site that mentions libraries as essential services. I'm sure there are other people who want that, so we can get that out to you and then probably send it along in a follow-up email. And I'm looking for other questions. I do want to say, as sub-grants give out and everything, there's excellent resources that you've been mentioning. And I think the thing to think about is when you give a sub-grant to a library or a museum, that you make sure that they're using the recommended resources from the EPA that are approved, because there are a lot of scam artists out there. And so I think a lot of people are turning to the state library for leadership. And I think a lot of the materials, as we've seen here today in this presentation, a lot of work has been done on this kind of topic. And as we get more information, as each speaker has said, it's a moving target. So it's been amazing to see how much people have moved forward. I see a question here from David Beach. How did you prepare your staff for the emotional difficulties facing during reopening? Denise, do you want to address that, or anyone else?
Sure, I can answer. We're not open yet. We're still working remotely, but while we've been away, I think that some of the things that have been most helpful are our CE coordinator has been doing weekly chats with public library staff, directors, just real drop-in kind of things. 1 week had a specific focus, but really it's just a place for them to be able to come around and talk about things in a way that maybe they haven't been able to find other places to share. Obviously, we send out as many resources from the state as we can, and we encourage them, because all of our libraries are county-based, to find similar resources at county level. We've done some mindfulness webinars. Actually, the children's coordinator did the juggling training, which was a way to try to lighten some of the mood, and again talked about mindfulness. And we've had other staff-related lunches and drop-ins and Slack conversations and things to try to keep people engaged while they're working remotely and maybe feeling a little disconnected from their colleagues. So those are a couple things off the top of my head.
Rob, do you have anything to add to that?
Sure. We're targeting our CARES Act money. We're just trying to figure out when would be the best time, but we want to do a series of sort of for library staff, mindfulness and mental health programming, and we're targeting that to a little bit later in the year, only because we're not quite sure when Massachusetts libraries are going to be having full staff back at their in their libraries. So possibly late fall, early winter, we'll be looking into some of those direct grant, sub-grants to address those issues.
Thank you. How about you, Mark? Anything that you can add?
Well, we certainly have been struggling with that, certainly with our own state library agency staff, as well as staff across the state. In terms of state library agency staff, I think one of the challenges when everybody is working remotely is keeping people kind of connected with one another and making them feel part of a team. And that's, we're having weekly, we never had all staff meetings before. We had 7 in a row with our agency now. We have frequent meetings on a divisional level, on a unit level, organizationally, just to try to keep people in touch with each other and connected. And so that's been important. We've been, of course, sharing EAP information. We've been sharing other types of information to kind of help people deal with it. On the library level, that's obviously harder, and I think we can't really address that so much directly, but just trying to be there as much as we can for our libraries statewide, be a resource that they can use, steer them towards materials. We've got a wonderful library development and networking team that is very empathetic and compassionate and clued into the needs of the library. So we know them. Obviously, like in all states, we know our librarians very well. A lot of them we know personally. So just trying to provide as much human support as we possibly can during this time.
Well, I thank you, Mark. I can tell you at IMLS we've been doing virtual coffee breaks and also virtual tours of museums. Surprise, surprise, as a way of the staff connecting and just feeling, yeah, we're all together. And we did have a staff person who had a, in quotes, mild case of COVID, and he is now back at work, and we're all happy and pleased to have him back. And we had an all-staff meeting today, and he said during it, he said the symptoms and everything, he goes, this is serious. And that coming from somebody who's had it is a real statement. So I'm real amazed at how much people are hanging in there and doing the best that they can during these very difficult times for a lot of people. I see another question by Claudia Holland, who says, please ask Rob to repeat the software he is using to aggregate responses from his libraries.
Sure thing.
Rob?
The product is called Padlet, P-A-D-L-E-T. There is a free version. We actually, our affiliate Mass Library System had a subscription to it. It's really neat. It really does recreate that sticky note thing, and we can also have people electronically vote on things. So it also recreates placing dots, and it has comment areas. You can drop in pictures, video. Worked out very, very nicely for a remote situation and kept people engaged beautifully.
Thank you. And we have another question, or more of a comment, from Maura Walsh. Actually, I think a lot of us could use this citation link to FEMA Essential Services. Could we get it? And could we get our meeting notes, please?
Definitely, Michelle. In fact, I'm looking for it in my right now, but I can't quite find it. But if I find it before we're off the call, I'll share it.
That's fine, and I will mention that IMLS has a link to the FEMA site on our COVID page on the IMLS website. So I strongly suggest you look there, because we are putting together information that we feel our grantees can use related to COVID, and certainly some of the many grants and other information that we have available now on COVID. And let me see if I have any other questions here. Okay, we're asking, Janet McKinney says, can you spell that, Rob?
I just typed it in chat. We're going to get it out too, but it's P-A-D-L-E-T, Padlet. I should work on commission for Padlet.
Thanks so much. Do we have any other questions? Let's see. I think we've almost covered all the questions from what I can see. IMLS, obviously, we covered a lot of information here, and I can't thank Rob, Denise, and Mark enough. You are truly superheroes to us, coming forward in this very difficult time for state libraries and taking your time to make this presentation. We are so grateful at IMLS for this. And now I would say that we'd like to have my boss, my wonderful boss, Terry Devoe, come back online and do the conference wrap-up and closing remarks.